Welcome back to the deep dive. So we're going to start today with one of those moments that is just, it's maddening, but it's something everyone, and I mean everyone, has felt.
Oh, absolutely.
It's that moment when a word, a name, some piece of knowledge is right there. You can feel it. It's on the tip of your tongue, but you just can't grab it.
It's a moment of total cognitive dissonance, isn't
Yeah.
it? You have this feeling of absolute certainty that you know the thing, but at the same time, a total failure to actually access it.
Exactly.
The source material we're diving into today kicks off with a great example of this. It's this character, Ivan, and he's just torturing himself trying to remember a conjurer's name.
Right.
He knows it's a horsey name. You know, he has the feel of it, maybe the first letter, but the name itself is just locked away. He's muttering, Jacob, Jacob, I can't remember it.
And that right there is the textbook tip of the tongue experience. We actually have a term for it, 2OT. And that feeling, what William James called an intensely active gap, that's really the jumping off point for our whole deep dive today.
It is. We're getting into the world of cognitive feelings, and we're doing it through the lens of a really foundational work by Jerome Dokic, Cognitive Feelings, an essay on the affective interfaces of the mind.
So our mission today is to go beyond just describing that tip of the tongue feeling and really try to build up, a solid theory around it. One that's philosophically rigorous, but also backed by what we're learning from empirical science.
Exactly. We want to understand what the mind is actually doing when it sends us one of those signals, that feeling.
And this really matters because Dokic makes a powerful case that these cognitive feelings, or CFs, they're not minor glitches. They're not, what did he call them? Entia minora?
Entia minora, yeah, minor entities. He's saying they are the absolute opposite of that. They're central to what he calls the mind's global economy.
Okay, global economy. Let's unpack that a bit.
Think of them as cross-border phenomena. They're the interface points, the little ambassadors that connect all these different parts of our mind perception, memory, belief, even our imagination and emotions. They're the glue.
I see. So this is naturally an interdisciplinary subject then. We're not just in philosophy here.
Oh, not at all. We're spanning philosophy, social sciences, cognitive sciences. When we talk about CFs, we're talking about a whole family of experiences. Of course, there's the tip of the tongue feeling, the general feeling of knowing.
But also things like the feeling of certainty, right? Or even just the ease you feel when you're reading something that flows well.
Yes, fluency. And then you get into the stranger ones like déjà vu. And maybe the most profound and overlooked one of all, the feeling of reality itself.
We take that one so for granted.
Every single second. But it's arguably the most powerful and important cognitive feeling we have. It's the baseline for everything.
Okay, that really sets the stage. But before we can get into the feeling of reality, we have to define our terms. If these are feelings, how are they different from a big, obvious emotion like being happy or angry? Or, for that matter, just a cold, hard thought?
That's the crucial question. So cognitive feelings are defined as genuine affective experiences, and their main job is to evaluate our own epistemic life.
Our epistemic life. So how well we're doing at knowing things.
Basically, yes. How well are we acquiring knowledge, managing it, accessing it? And for something to count as one of these affective experiences, it has to meet 3 core criteria.
Okay, 3 pillars. Let's dig into them one by one. What's the first?
The first is phenomenal valence.
Meaning it has to feel either good or bad.
Exactly. We get this intuitively with emotions, right?
Yeah.
Joy is positive, fear is negative. It's the same with CFs. Uncertainty, doubt, that feeling of unfamiliarity, they generally have a negative valence. They feel unpleasant.
Like the frustration of the tip of the tongue moment.
Precisely. And on the flip side, certainty, familiarity, fluency, those usually carry a positive valence. They feel good.
That makes sense. But what about the feeling of reality? You mentioned it earlier. That just feels neutral to me. I don't get a little jolt of happiness every time I look at my desk and confirm it's real.
And that's what's so fascinating about its valence. Dokic argues that it is positively valenced, but it's our constant, stable baseline. We're so used to it that we don't notice the positive feeling until it's taken away.
Ah, so you only notice it by its absence.
Exactly. When people experience derealization, that clinical condition where the world suddenly feels unreal, fake, like a movie said, they describe it as a profoundly negative experience. It's disorienting, even terrifying. The removal of that positive baseline of realness is deeply unpleasant.
So the normal feeling of reality is like a reward signal we're getting constantly, telling us our model of the world is matching up with the input. It's like
Yeah,
you only appreciate oxygen when you suddenly can't breathe.
that's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
It maintains our comfortable epistemic state.
Yeah.
So that's valence. The second criterion is that cognitive feelings have to be motivational and action-oriented.
Okay, so they're not just passive reports. They're meant to make us do something. They regulate our behavior.
Yes. All cognitive feelings, in one way or another, act as alarms or warning signals. They tell you that your first automatic attempt at some mental task has failed or is running into trouble.
And that a new approach is needed.
A new epistemic action is required. Let's go back to Ivan and his conjurer. The tip of the tongue feeling is that affective alarm bell going off, screaming, "Spontaneous retrieval has failed. You need to start an alternative search pattern."
And that's why he starts guessing, trying to think of related things. He's shifting his strategy.
He's moving from that automatic, type 1 processing to a more deliberate, conscious type 2 search. The feeling isn't the failure itself, it's the mechanism that prompts that crucial shift in strategy.
Got it. So they have valence, they're action-oriented. What's the third pillar?
The third, and this is maybe the most important part for the affective view, is that they are embodied.
Embodied.
They are fundamentally rooted in the motor and affective systems of our living body. They aren't just abstract calculations happening in some disembodied mind space.
What does that embodiment actually mean in this context? Are we just talking about getting sweaty palms when you're uncertain?
It's deeper than just arousal. It means the feeling itself is tied to a kind of preparedness for action, a motor tendency. The feeling of certainty, for instance, might physically manifest as a tendency to stand your ground, to assert something. The feeling of unfamiliarity is tied to the body's preparation for exploration, maybe a slightly faster heart rate, heightened senses.
Okay.
They're grounded in the body because they evolved to help a physical agent, us, navigate a physical world. And this idea of embodiment is really what sets the stage for Dokic's whole approach.
Okay, so to really grasp this affective view, we need to see where it fits. You mentioned this framework of monitoring and control.
Yes, this comes out of the study of metamemory. It's a two-level architecture. At the meta level, you have monitoring.
That's where the cognitive feelings are. They're watching the process.
Correct. They're monitoring aspects of the basic object-level cognitive processors, the actual attempt to remember or perceive or understand something. And then you have control. The control process takes the output from the monitor, that is, the feeling, and uses it to regulate those basic processes.
So monitoring reports, we have a problem, and control says, okay, let's try something else.
That's the loop. But this is where the big philosophical debate comes in. The standard view versus the affective view.
What's the standard story?
The standard psychological model usually says that CFs are monitoring pretty simple, indirect cues. Things like how fast you're processing something, how coherent it is, often just lumped together under the term processing fluency.
That makes a kind of intuitive sense. If an answer comes to me really quickly and smoothly, I feel more certain about it.
Right. But Dokic's affective view says that's not the whole story. It argues that CFs aren't just monitoring the smoothness of the process. They're monitoring the course of the basic epistemic actions themselves to assess the chances of success of those actions.
So it's more forward-looking. It's not how smoothly did that go, but what are the odds this is going to work out?
Exactly. Fluency might be one cue among many, but the feeling itself is about the expected practical outcome of the whole cognitive task. And that difference monitoring a simple cue versus monitoring an action tendency is huge.
Okay, so if the affective view is all about action, how does it stand up against the other Meiji theories? Let's start with the doxastic view.
The doxastic view, or DV. Yeah, this is the idea that cognitive feelings are, at their core, about belief. They're doxastically anchored.
Meaning they're either just a type of belief or they always involve some kind of push toward a belief.
A push or a tendency to believe something, yes. So in this view, the feeling of familiarity isn't some raw affective thing. It's just an inclination to believe that the thing you're encountering is, in fact, familiar.
That sounds pretty reasonable on the surface. If I feel certain I have an inclination to believe the thing is true, what's the problem with that?
The critique from the affective view isn't that the doxastic inclination doesn't exist. It does. But the affective view says that inclination is explained, at least in part, by the underlying action tendency.
So the action comes first.
The action tendency has explanatory priority. We don't just feel something is familiar and then decide how to act. We have a tendency to act as if it's familiar, and that tendency grounds the feeling and the subsequent belief.
Okay, if that's the case, we should be able to test it. Could you have the feeling and the adaptive action without having the concepts you'd need to actually form the belief?
And that is precisely the question. And there's a fantastic experiment with children from back in 1981 by Harris and his colleagues that gives us a really powerful piece of evidence against that strong doxastic view.
All right, let's break the study down because it sounds like a linchpin for the argument.
It really is. So they had two groups of kids, 8-year-olds and 11-year-olds. They gave them stories to read, but at certain points, they slipped in an anomalous sentence, something that just didn't make sense grammatically or logically in the context of the story.
Okay.
And what they measured was their reading speed. The key finding was that both groups, the 8s and the 11s, significantly slowed down their reading right when they hit those weird sentences.
And slowing down is the adaptive action. It's the behavioral sign that something's wrong, that comprehension has failed, and they need to reevaluate.
Exactly. That's the behavioral signature of the cognitive feeling of difficulty. But here's the brilliant part, the dissociation. When they were asked about it afterwards, only the older kids, the 11-year-olds, could actually explain what was wrong. They could say, that sentence was difficult, or that didn't make sense.
But the younger kids couldn't.
The 8-year-olds lack the conceptual mastery. They didn't really have a firm grasp on the concept of difficulty or incoherence. And yet they had the feeling and they acted on it perfectly. They slowed down.
Wow. Okay, so that really does undermine the doxastic view. If the feeling depended on a push to believe this is difficult, the 8-year-olds couldn't have had it, but they clearly did. The action was there without the belief.
It suggests the whole mechanism operates at a level that's independent of belief. It's about regulating action first and foremost.
All right, so if they're not just a kind of belief, why aren't they just a subtle form of perception? That's the perceptual view, right? The idea that I can perceive the familiarity of a song the same way I perceive its melody.
That's the perceptual view, or PV, the idea that CX are perceptual experiences of these high-level epistemic features. And Dokic has a couple of major critiques here, starting with the problem of unification.
Unification. You mean trying to make all these different things fit under one banner of perception?
Exactly. Think about a basic bodily perception, like hunger. It's rooted in a very clear sensory system. The PV wants us to put that in the same category as perceiving an abstract feature like certainty or familiarity. But where's the sensory input for certainty? You see the words on the page, but are you really perceiving the property of familiarity itself? It's hard to unify those.
And the second critique feels even more fundamental, especially when we talk about the feeling of reality.
It is. The question is realness even a property that can be perceived, like color or shape? Many philosophers would argue that reality is a purely formal concept. It's a status, a value, not a material feature of an object. And if it's not a material feature, you can't literally perceive it. You can only perceive things as real.
Which sort of collapses the argument. And that brings us back to the affective view as this kind of synthesis. It's not belief, it's not perception, it's about action.
It's about epistemic action tendencies. And this is a core idea. These feelings embody practical knowledge about what to do next, epistemically speaking. Do you push forward? Do you stop and search? Do you switch tracks? The belief that something is familiar comes from the tendency to act like it's familiar, to rely on your internal knowledge, not the other way around. The motivation, the action profile, comes first.
It sounds like a deeply efficient, pragmatic system. The body and the lower-level systems just start preparing for the right action, and the feeling is the signal that bubbles up to consciousness to let the CEO, so to speak, know what's happening.
That's a great way to put it. The feeling is the phenomenal output of all that subpersonal work, which leads us directly to the question of what's going on under the hood, this idea of meta-representation.
Right, a representation of a representation.
Yeah.
But there's a crucial distinction we need to make here.
Yes, the strong versus weak distinction. Strong meta-representation is the complex stuff. It's when you represent another representation as a representation using semantic conceptual terms.
Like saying, Mary believes that it's raining. I'm representing her belief as a belief. That requires a theory of mind.
It does. It's high level. Weak meta-representation, on the other hand, is much simpler. It's when a system represents what is, in fact, another representation, but not in those semantic terms. Think of a thermostat. It's representing the state of the room, which is a representation, but it's not thinking about it in terms of temperature.
It's just a mechanical feedback loop.
Exactly. So if cognitive feelings are fundamentally affective, non-conceptual things, where do they land?
They'd have to rely on weak meta-representation at most.
The conclusion is that they rely on monitoring processes that are at least partly subpersonal. The feeling of familiarity is a great example. Models like the one from Whittlesey and Williams suggest it depends on a subpersonal calculation, a comparison between how fluently you expected to process something and how fluently you actually did. That whole discrepancy check happens way below conscious awareness.
So you don't need strong meta-representation for the feeling to be generated. The system doesn't need to think the word difficulty to produce the feeling of difficult.
Not at all. Monitoring a simple cue like reaction time is a first-order process. At most, it's weakly meta-representational. The system might just be registering a non-semantic signal like current process does not match template. The affective feeling is the conscious experience of that low-level mismatched signal.
Okay, we've built the foundation. We know CS are affective, action-oriented, and subpersonal. Now let's apply this framework to some really complex human experiences, starting with the difference between the feeling of reality and the sense of presence.
This is a great application. The idea of presence gets talked about a lot, especially now with the VR, to describe that feeling of really being there when you perceive something versus just imagining it.
Right.
And Dokic's argument is that this sense of presence is actually a composite experience. It's not one single feeling. It's the feeling of reality plus a few other non-feeling conditions all happening at once.
So we need to carefully pull them apart. Let's start with felt presence. What are the conditions for feeling that something is present?
There are three. First is intentional presence. This is the easy one. You just have to be having a perceptual experience of the object. You're seeing it, hearing it, whatever.
Second.
Second is bodily action availability. This is key. You have to experience the object as being, as they say, ready to hand. It's available for you to interact with, to walk around, to grab. It's within your sphere of potential action.
Which ties right back to the embodiment criterion we talked about, and the third condition.
The third is self-identification.
Mm.
You have to identify with the body that's doing the perceiving and has the potential to act. It has to feel like it's my body from my perspective.
This precise three-part definition is so useful because it lets us analyze those strange states where things feel off. Let's take derealization. Which of those three conditions breaks down?
Well, someone experiencing derealization still has perfectly good perception. They see the objects are there, available for action. So intentional presence and bodily action availability are both intact. They can still reach out and grab a doorknob. But they report feeling like they're watching a movie of the world, or like there's a pane of glass between them and reality. They fail self-identification. The perspective is there, the body is there, but they don't feel identified with it. They feel like a detached observer.
An observer without ownership.
That's a great way of putting it. Now, contrast that with a totally different example. The ephemeral art of someone like Felicia Verini.
Oh, right. He paints these huge geometric shapes across rooms, but they only line up from one perfect vantage point.
Exactly. So when you stand in that one sweet spot, you perceive the object, a perfect square, say, and you definitely self-identify with your body. But the object is not experienced as being available for bodily action.
Because if you take one step to the side, the illusion shatters. The square breaks apart into meaningless lines on different walls.
Your visual motor system is in direct conflict with what your descriptive vision is telling you. Your body knows it's a trick, so it fails the bodily action availability condition. And that powerful feeling of presence is blocked, even though the image is clear.
This separation is really clarified by research in virtual reality. You mentioned Slater's work distinguishing place illusion and plausibility.
Yes, this is a crucial distinction they make in VR research. Place illusion, or PI, is the experience of being there, of being in the virtual world. This is almost entirely about presence. It's driven by how well you identify with your avatar and how realistically the world responds to your body's movements.
So place illusion maps onto bodily action availability and self-identification.
Pretty much. But then you have plausibility. And plausibility is the feeling that what is apparently happening is really happening. This is the feeling of reality. And the key thing is you can have one without the other.
Give me an example.
You could be in a hyper-realistic VR simulation of a room. The tracking is perfect. You feel totally present high place illusion. But then a ghost floats through a solid wall.
Right. Plausibility just plummets to zero.
Exactly. Your sense of presence might be totally intact, but your feeling of reality is shattered because the world just violated a fundamental rule. You can feel present in a world that you also feel is not real. This dissociation proves that the feeling of reality is this distinct, fundamental CF that's judging the world's coherence, separate from our feeling of being embedded in it.
So this feeling of reality is what helps us decide what to put in our belief box. How does the mind make that call? What's the process?
The process is called reality monitoring. It's a set of mechanisms, mostly subpersonal and automatic, that are constantly evaluating every piece of information, a memory, a perception, a thought, and deciding if it's reality congruent or not.
And it's not a simple yes-no switch.
Not at all. The key thing to remember is that these processes are heuristic, holistic, and probabilistic. They're not looking for absolute proof. They're looking for a pattern of cues that, in the past, have usually signaled that something is real.
Okay, what are some of those major reality cues the brain is looking for? I'm guessing processing fluency is one.
For sure. Processing fluency and coherence are big ones. If something is easy to process and fits with everything else, that's a check in the real column. But it gets more interesting. There's also informational density.
So vividness, detail.
The more vivid and richly detailed an experience is, the more real it feels. This is a heuristic our brains use all the time.
And it's one that can be hacked, right? I'm thinking of what Roland Barthes has called the reality effect in literature.
That's a perfect example. Barthes has noticed that realist novelists would intentionally include all these tiny, useless details, the exact time on a clock, the type of fabric on a chair, details that do nothing to advance the plot.
Why?
Their only function is to increase the informational density, to create the feeling of reality in the reader. They're flooding our reality monitoring system with cues to make us feel like this fictional world must be real, because real life is also full of random, unimportant details.
So it's weaponizing our own cognitive bias.
That's brilliant. What about a more philosophical cue like representational depth? Representational depth is the sense that an object or a scene continues to exist beyond your current perception of it. When you look at a real mountain, you have this implicit feeling that you could walk around to the other side, that it has a back, that it will still be there if you close your eyes. It refers to a transcendent reality.
Whereas a fictional object often feels like it's completely contained by its description. It has no back.
Exactly. Then there's affective power. This is the capacity of the experience to affect you physically or emotionally. If you're standing on the edge of a virtual cliff in a VR game and you feel actual vertigo, that gut feeling is a powerful cue for your brain that the cliff must be real, even if you intellectually know it's not.
The body's reaction overrides the intellect.
It's a very strong cue. And finally, maybe the strongest of all is sensoromotor contingencies, the possibility of interaction. Our ability to reach out and touch something, to manipulate it, is often the ultimate reality check, even more so than how realistic it looks.
I often hear people mix up reality monitoring and source monitoring, but they're not the same thing.
They're definitely not. Source monitoring is about figuring out the origin of information. Did this come from the outside world, or was it internally generated by my own mind? A thought, a dream, and imagining.
And reality monitoring is about whether it's congruent with reality regardless of the source.
Precisely. And this is the mind-bending part.
Mm-hmm.
Information can be internally generated and reality congruent.
How does that work? How can a thought I just made up be considered real?
This is what's called actuality-oriented imagining. Let's say you're away on a trip and you're trying to remember if you left a window open. You conjure up an image of your apartment in your mind. That image is internally generated.
Right.
But because that imagining is constrained by your actual memories of your apartment's layout, it's evaluated as being reality congruent. The feeling of reality attaches to that imagined scene, and it allows you to move from imagining to believing. You conclude, ah yes, I believe that window was closed.
I see. So the feeling of reality isn't just for perception, it governs all our inquiries. And the feeling only really becomes noticeable when there's a problem.
Yes, that's when the CFs really step in. They are signals that our usual automatic way of handling the world has failed. When we suddenly stop taking reality for granted, the feeling of unreality kicks in and calls for what we call secondary reflective epistemic actions. We have to stop, step back, and consciously think about the evidence.
Okay, if the feeling of reality is that fundamental, we have to talk about what Dokic calls the mother of all cognitive feelings. Familiarity.
Familiarity is just.
Hmm.
It's everywhere. It's a transsensory phenomenon. You can feel it with a taste, a sound, a person, an abstract idea. And critically, it's also category relative.
Category relative. What do you mean by that?
Well, you're rarely familiar with something just in general. You're familiar with it as something.
Yeah.
This book on my desk might feel incredibly familiar as an object I see every day, but totally unfamiliar as a first edition I just found out it was. A face in a crowd might be familiar as a famous actor, but unfamiliar as the person standing next to you in line. The feeling attaches to the specific category you're processing it under.
That makes a lot of sense. And this brings us back to the tip of the tongue state. James's intensely active gap. It's not empty.
No, it has a shape. The toti is the perfect example of intense familiarity coexisting with a total failure of identification.
Oh.
You know about the thing, you know the name starts with a J, you know he's a conjurer, and that partial information creates this complex feeling that has different dimensions.
What are those dimensions? How can familiarity vary?
Well, it varies in intensity or salience, and this is massively affected by context and expectation. If you bump into your dentist on a remote hiking trail, the feeling of familiarity is 1,000 times more intense than seeing her in her office because it's so unexpected.
Right.
It also varies in specificity, which part of it feels familiar, and proximity, which is that feeling of how close you are to actually retrieving the information.
And what's the motivational profile? If unfamiliarity makes us go out and explore the world, what does familiarity make us do?
Familiarity is an instruction to do the opposite. It's a signal that says, the answer is in here somewhere. The primary attempt to find it failed, but don't give up. Exploit your inner resources. It tells you to search your memory, to try different retrieval cues, not to go looking for new information externally.
This action-oriented view has some really big consequences for how we think about perception and recognition. This is the autonomy thesis, right?
Yes, the autonomy thesis basically says that your raw perceptual experience is separate from these cognitive feelings. And when you apply that to memory, it leads to a really interesting conclusion, that you can perceive something, an individual thing, or a property, without actually being able to recognize it.
Wait, that feels counterintuitive. I thought perception was recognition. You're saying I can see something, feel that it's intensely familiar, but have no idea what it is.
Absolutely. The feeling of familiarity can come before full recognition. You see a pattern on a building that gives you this powerful jolt of familiarity, but you just can't place it. You are genuinely perceiving a specific pattern, and your system is flagging it as familiar, all before your conscious mind has managed to categorize or identify it.
This seems to connect with Fred Dretschke's idea of simple perception.
It does. Dretschke's idea of non-epistemic seeing. He argued you can see a specific bird without knowing it's a finch or even what a bird is. You're just taking in the raw visual data. We can extend that idea to properties. Your visual system is perfectly capable of locking on to a specific shape or color and tracking it without your higher level cognitive system needing to slap a label on it and say, that's the color burgundy.
So things like our built-in perceptual constancy mechanisms are doing this work.
Yes. Think about shape constancy. Your brain is constantly calculating an object's true shape even as your viewing angle changes. It's individuating and tracking that property below the level of conscious thought. And that subpersonal process can feed into the familiarity monitor. If it tracks a property with unusual ease, that can trigger the feeling of familiarity before you've consciously recognized, oh, that's a trapezoid.
Okay, let's narrow the focus from general familiarity to the kind that's tied to our own past, to memory. The defining feature of episodic memory is what Endel Tulving called autonoetic consciousness.
That sense of mental time travel, that feeling that you're re-experiencing something from your own past.
And a huge part of that feeling is what the source material calls first-handedness.
Yes, this is the core cognitive feeling of episodic memory. It's the sense that the information you're accessing is coming directly, causally from your own past experience. And this feeling relies on incredibly sophisticated, fine-grained source monitoring happening under the hood.
So within this, we can actually identify two different types of memory feelings.
Right. Both are specialized versions of familiarity. First, there's the episodic feeling of knowing. This is a perspective feeling. It's the tip of the tongue state for your own life. You know you've met this person before. You can almost taste the memory. You feel that the first-hand information is in there and available, even if you can't access it right now.
And the second one, the feeling of remembering, is what happens when you do access it.
Yes, this is retrospective. It accompanies the fully retrieved memory. And its signature feature is the powerful sense that there's more where that came from. A rich context, other details you could access if you tried. That feeling of available depth is what makes it feel so different from just recalling a semantic fact, like the capital of France.
This distinction leads to the two-tiered account of remembering. Can you break down those two tiers?
So tier one is the content-providing experience. This is usually a sensory imagining. You get a mental image of the event.
Oh.
But, and this is key, that image is being guided and constructed by your memory systems, which are selecting the first-hand details below the level of your awareness.
And tier two?
Tier two is the feeling itself. The feeling of remembering is like a comment or a tag that gets attached to the T or K image. It's the phenomenal signal that says, the source of this image is your own past. It's what tells you you're remembering, not just making something up.
It's the stamp of authenticity.
It is. And this episodic familiarity is so powerful. It's what allows us to trust our past and build a coherent self. It motivates us to act on that information and to interact with people based on a shared history we take for granted.
And there's a threshold for these feelings, right? It's not all or nothing.
No, it's threshold-based.
Yeah.
The feelings only get triggered when the system monitors a certain quantity or quality of firsthand information. And that threshold is probably flexible. In a social situation where being wrong has high costs, your internal threshold for feeling certain you remember something correctly might go way up.
Okay, we've covered the role of these feelings in our everyday cognitive lives. Now we get to pivot to where they get, well, transfigured into aesthetic and even self-transcendent experiences.
Right. And the argument here is a big one. It's that cognitive feelings like wonder, awe, familiarity, strangeness, they aren't just, optional extras for aesthetic experience. They are an integral constitutive part of it.
This immediately makes me think of the poet Baudelaire. He had that famous line, something about how beauty always has a bit of strangeness in it.
Beauty always contains a certain degree of strangeness, and that this form of strangeness is what gives it the right to be called beauty. He absolutely nailed the core tension.
Yeah.
But to even get to that tension, we have to deal with a big philosophical objection first.
The disinterestedness argument.
Yes, the old Kantian idea that to appreciate something aesthetically, you have to be disinterested. You're contemplating it for its own sake, not for any practical purpose or goal.
But cognitive feelings are the opposite of that. They're inherently interested. Curiosity has a goal. Get the information. So how can they be part of aesthetics? It seems like a direct contradiction.
The way to resolve it is to get more precise about what we mean by interested. Yes, a cognitive feeling like curiosity has a very specific, finite goal. Once you get the answer, the curiosity is satisfied and it ends. But aesthetic experience, it doesn't have a definite external goal like that. Instead, it is self-sustaining or autotelic.
It's an end in itself. And it's self-sustaining because the aesthetic object is designed to keep our interest.
Exactly. And it keeps our interest by presenting what the source material calls the optimal challenge. It creates the perfect dynamic interplay between feelings of familiarity and unfamiliarity. The pleasure isn't just in solving the puzzle and making it familiar, it's in the sustained process of trying to solve it, as the object skillfully resists being fully understood or categorized.
So the failure to just easily slot it into a known category isn't frustrating, like it is with the tip of the tongue. In an aesthetic context, it's actually pleasurable because it forces your mind to stretch to accommodate this new thing.
The pleasure is in that productive failure. Your cognitive system is trying to assimilate this strange new thing using its old maps, and the artwork keeps saying, nope, try again, forcing you to draw new maps. That metacognitive struggle is the source of the unique aesthetic pleasure.
We can understand this better with the componential analysis, which splits aesthetic experience into 4 levels. Where does this interplay of feelings fit?
So level 1 is just basic perception. Level 3 is specific aesthetic emotions, like feeling joy or sadness from a piece of music. Level 4 is the explicit judgment. This is beautiful.
And the core action is at level 2.
Level 2 is the aesthetic stance. And this is where that self-sustaining motivational profile lives. It's defined by that productive failure to assimilate, which creates this ongoing need for cognitive accommodation. The feeling of the sublime, for example, comes from something so vast it resists being assimilated into our normal categories of size, forcing us into a state of awe. This level, this unique way of relating to an object driven by the CF interplay, is what's truly sui generis about aesthetics.
So it's the cognitive process itself, before you even put a label on it, that makes it aesthetic.
Precisely. The feeling of managed cognitive disruption becomes the engine of aesthetic value. We enjoy things that are epistemically challenging in this safe context because they let us practice updating our models of the world without any real danger.
That idea of profound disruption is the perfect bridge to our final topic, the extreme cases. Self-transcendent experiences, or STEs.
Yes, where the very boundaries between the self and the world seem to dissolve or radically change. We're talking about a broad category of experiences here, feelings of oneness, but also feelings of profound alienation or smallness.
And what's the engine driving these incredible shifts?
It's the same engine, believe it or not. It's the feeling of familiarity or unfamiliarity, but with one massive change. They become global instead of local. They're not attached to a specific face or a book anymore. They're attached to the world as a whole, to reality itself.
Okay, so how does that play out? How does global familiarity lead to an STE?
A feeling of overwhelming global familiarity can trigger self-expansion. This is the classic oceanic feeling, a sense of oneness with the universe. Everything feels deeply connected, known, and part of a single whole.
And the opposite.
An intense, unexpected, global unfamiliarity triggers self-retraction. This is the feeling of awe in the face of something overwhelmingly vast or powerful, the feeling of being vanishingly small and insignificant. The world suddenly feels alien, strange, and unassimilable.
What about the most extreme state, ego dissolution, where the self-world boundary completely disappears? That sounds like a non-dual state that would be beyond feelings of familiarity or unfamiliarity.
The argument is that what people usually describe isn't a stable non-dual state, but the process of getting there. It's a limiting case. So the experience is actually of a powerful tendency towards total union, driven by maximal familiarity, or a tendency towards total alienation, driven by maximal unfamiliarity. So even at the edge of ego dissolution, these dualistic cognitive feelings are still the driving force pushing the self toward one pole or the other.
That makes sense. Finally, what about the affective complexity? These experiences can be blissful, but they can also be absolutely terrifying. Why?
The final valence, the good or badness of the STE, depends on two things. First is the core feeling itself. Familiarity generally feels good. Unfamiliarity generally feels bad. But the second, an absolutely crucial factor, is the subject's own evaluation of their coping potential.
So, do I feel like I have the mental resources to handle this massive boundary shift?
Precisely. Take the experience of flow.
Hmm.
You have high familiarity, and you also feel your skills are a perfect match for the challenge. You feel the world can be completely assimilated. High coping potential. That's blissful. But if you're hit with overwhelming global unfamiliarity, the vastness of space, say, and you feel you have no way to process it, your coping potential is low, that leads directly to terror and dread.
We have come full circle. From Ivan's struggle with a single name to the dissolution of the self in the cosmos, and the connecting thread has been these quiet, powerful cognitive feelings. Let's try to pull together the core takeaways from Dokic's affective view.
I think the biggest one is what we can call the affective imperative. The idea that cognitive feelings are not an afterthought. They're not just intellectual judgments. They are true affective experiences defined by their motivational profiles and their action tendencies. Their job is to tell us what to do.
And the second major point is the absolute centrality of familiarity.
Yes, it seems like the feeling of familiarity and its opposite, unfamiliarity, are the main dial that controls the whole system. You can see almost all other CS as variations on this theme. They're all answering one basic, pragmatic question for the organism. Should my next move be exploitation of what I already know or exploration of the outside world?
They are the mind's essential regulators, and as the source material points out, they mostly operate quietly. They only really flare up when our automatic Type 1 thinking fails, and we need to switch to that more deliberate Type 2 mode. They're the check engine light for the mind.
It's true. And it's worth remembering that because our daily reality is usually so stable, these strong cognitive feelings are actually relatively rare phenomena. Most of the time, our epistemic life just hums along unnoticed. We take the feeling of reality completely for granted.
Which is the perfect setup for the final, provocative thought we want to leave you all with today.
If we really take Dokic's analysis seriously, if we accept that the most profound pleasure we get from art comes from objects that are designed to resist familiarization, objects that challenge our mental maps and force us to grow, then what does that say about how we live the rest of our lives?
We spend so much energy seeking out what's easy, what's certain, what feels familiar.
But maybe the most important moments, the times we actually learn something new, aren't when our beliefs are confirmed. Maybe they're in those little moments of cognitive disruption, the moments when those deep world-latching mechanisms, our feelings of reality and familiarity, just for a second, stutter. Because that's when we're forced to ask the most vital question there is: what am I taking for granted about the world right now?